This is Brett of the Brookbush Institute, and in this video we're going to go over the straight leg raise test. I'm going to have my friend Yvette come out. She's going to help me demonstrate. Now, the straight leg raise test is a neurodynamic test for the sciatic nerve and dorsal nerve structures. And what we're going to do is lengthen this nerve and see if we can bring on neural symptoms or concordant symptoms, right? So the patient's complaint. And when we talk about neural symptoms, guys, usually we're talking about things like tingling and numbness and that pins and needles paresthesia, or that searing pain. If any of you guys have ever bumped your funny bone, like, you know that type of pain is very different than muscular pain. So keep that in mind as we do this test. The test itself is fairly simple. We're just literally going to raise a straight leg. Right? The two things you kind of want to watch out for is we got to keep the knee in extension, and you want to leave the ankle alone in the initial test. And what do I mean by leave the ankle alone? I mean leave it in neutral, because any movement of the ankle can change the tension in the sciatic nerve. All right? We'll get to that in a second. So if I go ahead and bring up her leg, what I'm looking for is either the onset of tension with some of those neurological symptoms, or neurogenic symptoms, I should say, right? So like I said, paresthesia, numbness, tingling, or it starts bringing on her concordant sign down the leg or in her back, right? So I could go ahead and go, Yvette, does this bring on any of your symptoms? No, we're okay? Still okay? Cool. We see Yvette does not have flexibility issues. Lucky her, my hamstrings would have taken over by now. And that's something to think about, guys, is keep in mind that we're kind of pulling people up to what would be the end of hamstring extensibility in the normal individual. So a little discomfort in the back of the knee or stretching across the back of the leg, those are very normal things and not a positive test. A positive test would be like, you get somebody up to here, they start having like the shooting pain down the back of their leg, they start having pain in their lumbar spine, they start talking about that complaint that they came in with that was related to that lumbar spine pain in the buttock and sciatica, right? That's what we're looking for. Now, if you weren't sure, like let's say you have this patient, you get them to 45 degrees, they're complaining because they like to complain. They're not being very clear on whether it's like hamstring tightness or whether it's more nerve involvement. Well, go ahead and try the other leg. If you try the other leg, and you get them to the same position, they're still complaining about the same pain in the back of their leg, and it really doesn't sound like nerve involvement, you might just have somebody who has hamstring tightness in both sides. Now, the other thing that we could do is we could start trying to sensitize this by adding tension to the nerve itself and seeing if that provokes more symptoms. The first thing we could do to increase tension in the dorsal nerve structures is I could do this test, get my position of where I know I'm running into tension, and then go, okay, back off a little bit. Let me have you tuck your chin to your chest. All right, and then if I go back up and she's complaining about her concordant symptoms and that made it worse, well, I know her hamstrings don't attach to her neck. That would be very strange hamstrings. Right? But we do know that this is going to lengthen, right, her spinal cord and increase tension in her sciatic nerve. That's starting to get me thinking, okay, maybe this is a nerve issue, right? So head up makes symptoms worse, potentially nerve. You could go the opposite way too, guys, right? So you could go flexion of the neck. Go ahead and come up. See where that lets you go. And then let's say that's where her symptoms are. And then I back off a little bit, have her put her head down. And if all of a sudden I get a lot farther before I get symptoms, again, that could be a sign of nerve stuff. Now, some other stuff that is going to start complicating this. Before we complicate this any further, though, I want you guys to master kind of the test that I just laid out for you. That is the straight leg test. That is the majority of what you're going to need with most individuals, is just the ability to identify concordant signs in the low back or back of the leg or neurogenic symptoms so that you understand whether there is nerve involvement in this person's pathology or not. What I'm about to talk to you guys about is now getting a little bit more specific with our diagnosis, right? So there is something called the well leg raise sign. If I raise her opposite leg and that causes pain in her sided back pain, so let's say she had right-sided low back pain, I lifted her left leg and that caused more right-sided low back pain, that is a big sign of like a herniated nucleus pulposus, right? So that's like a big HMP sign. Right, so if you get symptoms increased in the low back with the opposite leg raise, we're thinking in the direction of HMP. Now, let's say we go back to this nerve root thing with a positive straight leg raise test, but now I want to get fancy. And I'm going to get fancy for one of two reasons. Either I have some sort of responsibility regarding the diagnosis of what level this radiculopathy is, or what level we might have an HMP rubbing on a nerve. So now I want to sensitize this test, try to determine what nerve is involved at the lower portion of the leg to help me with that. Or another reason to get fancy is I kind of dig these neurodynamic techniques. I'm thinking one of these neurodynamic techniques might help, and if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, please look up Butler or Shacklock. These are great professionals with these techniques to help floss and stretch nerves, right? Especially in individuals who have some sort of neurodynamic pathology. I'll show you what we're going to do here, and I think you guys will catch on. So if I leave the ankle alone and just pull up like this, chances are most of the tension is going through the sciatic and tibial branch of the sciatic nerve. Now, if I want to sensitize the tibial nerve further, I could add dorsiflexion. Right? Granted, chances are I would probably do that by doing this, guys, and keeping this hand here. If I want to sensitize even farther with the tibial nerve, I could dorsiflex and evert, right? So now I'm going to dorsiflex and evert and bring up. So now I got several ways of sensitizing the sciatic and tibial nerve. Remember, I still have the neck flexion thing. I now have dorsiflexion and dorsiflexion with eversion. If I wanted to go sural nerve, all right, so now this is a different segment. I would go dorsiflexion with inversion and pull up, right? So if this brings on concordant symptoms, or this makes the concordant symptoms much, much worse, now I'm thinking sural nerve. Peroneal nerve is kind of the weird one, where we go plantar flexion and inversion, right? Sorry, let me change my hand position there. All right, and come up this way. All right, so again, guys, you have tibial nerve is dorsiflexion and eversion. Sural nerve is dorsiflexion and inversion. Peroneal nerve is plantar flexion and inversion. And again, the reason I said you might do those is either to help try to differentiate what segment your involvement is at the lumbar spine, or you like those neurodynamic techniques. Or I guess we could add one further thing. Maybe you wanted to experiment with releasing the muscles and tracts involved with the nerve that you found to be most involved with this person's pathology. So I guess we could throw in some fancy release technique stuff there too. Now, like I said, that got way, way, way more complicated real fast. The original straight leg raise test, you are looking for concordant symptoms in the low back or back of the leg, just like this. I'm grabbing ankle here, I'm grabbing just above the knee to keep knee extension. I'm not messing with any of this. I'm just all about Yvette's symptoms and whether this is going to bring on neurogenic symptoms, or whether I can pull her leg all the way up to a point where I get hamstring involvement, giving me a good indication that her sciatic nerve is not involved. I can compare legs, and should compare legs. If when I'm comparing legs, the opposite leg brings on low back signs, or low back concordant symptoms, that's the well leg raise sign. And that is probably a good sign that we have some sort of disc issue. And then of course, let me back up one. You also have the chin thing, right, to help sensitize this test, right? So does that make her symptoms worse if she puts it down? Do I go ahead and put your head down? I'm sorry. Back on the, there you go. Just goes to show you guys patient communication. So yeah, her head down on the table, and that gives me a little bit more range. That gives me an idea that we have some nerve stuff. And then of course last, if you guys want to get into the differentiation of which branch of the sciatic nerve in the lower leg, we got tibial nerve is dorsiflexion and eversion, sural nerve is dorsiflexion and inversion, peroneal nerve is plantar flexion and inversion. I'll be quite honest with you guys, I often have to look these up because I tend to stick to that straight leg raise sign for a really long period of time. And then when I occasionally get that person who I can get into this stuff with, I usually have to go back to my notes a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that, guys. Just keep those notes handy so that if you do want to get into some of the fancier stuff, or you do have a reason to think that you can help by differentiating what segment you're at, you have those notes handy. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I'd be more than happy to answer them.